So normally on Godot, you have to set your inputs through the project settings input map, and here you will list an action with a given input that will trigger that action. However, today I'm going to be showing you how you can do basically this, which is to pass a list of inside of your code of the game. You're going to pass a list of string names with a type of input is either the device you're using, so this is going to be either a keyboard button or a mouse button, and we are going to simply pass the rest of the inputs as in integer. So these are constants from the global scope, which represents the input of some devices, and here you can see that the prefix is key for the keyboard, and as you can see there's a lot of pre-stored inputs as integers for your keyboard actions. So the idea for this is to be more efficient than having to go to the project settings input map and having to list all your inputs, and also have to filter out inputs as built-in inputs which get mixed along. And you can see how this list is going to get bigger as your game grows. So I found that using this is a lot more clean, and if you want to basically set up some inputs for another project, you can just copy and paste the code for this, and it's going to work for any project you want. So while this is some work that I'm doing for my RTS project updates, I'm going to be showing you how you can do this inside our last tutorial, which was the third-person camera. So I'm going to be applying this input tutorial to this project. So this way we are going to eliminate all the inputs from the input map, and we're going to be doing through code. So first let me just set the material on something here. So for my guy here, I'm going to create a new standard shader, and I'm going to be basically putting some color in it. So some minor detail, so it looks a little bit better. There we go. So our prototype has a little more color in it, and I want actually to look a little bit different. So yeah, I want its back to be different. So let's go to V very quickly, and let's just offset this so I hide the many eyes of Godot. And there we go. That looks better. Okay, so with this prototype, we have a bunch of inputs. So let's start by defining the constants for it. So let me just put my main project aside here. It's going to be the basis for this tutorial. And let's create now a input manager. So the interface is going to be through the project, the input map itself. We are not going to eliminate the use of the input map. We are just going to manage this type of information through the script rather than through the interface here. And there's nothing wrong with this interface. It's just that it kind of gets pain in the butt when you're dealing with a lot of different projects, and you'll have to set up the input map every time here. And also it's more fast to set up through code. So I think through code is going to be better. So let me just go ahead and create here a new folder, which is going to be our input manager. And I'm going to be creating here a new script, and this script I'm going to be call it as the main one for that. So the first thing we're going to be doing here is to define some enumerations, which is going to represent some information we're going to need. So let's do some enums here. So you want inputs for the keyboard to be a given value. So I'm going to be placing here -1 and mouse as -2. So why I'm doing this thing here? Most of these inputs, which if you do key S, any type of inputs, you're going to see that they are mostly positive. So I found that if you do that negative through code, we can detect if this is an input or a change of mode. So this is going to be used as setup for modes. And we also have to place here some modes that we're going to use in the code. So it's just to make things look clean. Now let's go through constant, and this is going to be basically the place that you're going to store your input actions. So let's define a new constant, which you're going to be calling input actions. And this is going to be a dictionary of string names. And yes, dictionaries now can be typed because this is Godot 4.4 Dev 4. and we are going to be using an array for the inputs, but sadly we cannot define a integer sub input here for the static typing because nested collections are not typed yet, are not supported. So let's leave it this and let's define it right here. So we're going to be using string names because the input actions are basically that. You have to see the difference between string and string names. Basically, string names are more efficient because they don't generate new strings every time you define a new one. They are stored and packed inside of memory a little more efficient. So we're going to be using string names. And we can define string names by using the E and the double quotes here. And let's start by naming our project actions here. So we have some of them. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't know if I can type. No, I cannot. So I'm going to go ahead and make a list of all of these. So here now we have a dictionary of string names with arrays, which is this structure here. So I'm going to be given the inputs we want right here. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but the way that I'm going to structure is by allowing our arrays to contain both input events from the mouse and keyboard at the same time. And through an algorithm we're going to build on a later function down here, we're going to basically sort this out. So I'm going to basically start by defining if this is a key button, which is this one, or a mouse button. And whichever next inputs on this are going to be considered as keyboards. And if I want to use mouse inputs, I'm going to be placing them before all that. So this is going to basically allow me to have keyboard and mouse inputs on the same place. So if I ever wanted to do other keyboard events, I can basically put them under here, like key S, and also as mouse buttons, like mouse button left. So this is going to work inside of code because we're going to be sorting through these, and the first one is going to be read as a keyboard button. So the key S is going to be interpreted as keyboard, and because on the enumeration thing here, you can see that is stored as 83, and the mouse events are also numbered. So let's go. I don't know why it's not going back. So on the mouse button, you can see there's 1 through 9. So I don't know if they are reserved. I think they are shared. I'm not sure, but that doesn't matter. We're going to do through code. So this is going to basically filter out. So whenever we are sorting through these, we are going to detect that these are keyboard events based on this one. That's why I choose -1, because there are no inputs with negative numbers. So that's why we're going to be doing this. So let's just place this mouse events as our test here, because we're not going to be using. And here, let's actually place the inputs we want. So we want to basically move our character with the keyboard events. So I'm going to be copying with keyboards. All of these, I think, are inputs from the keyboard. And actually, we have a mixture here, which we're going to be using to apply this project. It's going to be very cool on the zoom functions here. So for the movement, we want key forwards is key W. For the backwards, we want key S. For the right, we want key D. And for the left, we want our key as A. The shoulder on the right one, I believe is key E. We can double check this on the input just to make sure. Yeah. So, and for the left one is key Q. And the zoom function, we want the keypad, so I don't know if that is keypad minus add. And we also can add here the mouse zoom, so mouse button and its wheel up. And you can see that this is very intuitive way of dealing with inputs. I think this is a lot better than having to deal with the project actions. Not that I dislike the interface, I just think it slows things down a little bit when you are in a hurry. So keypad, subtract. And also I think this is another way you can deal with inputs. It's always nice to know more tools which is going to allow you to build other things as well with other devices. So here I'm only using a keyboard and a mouse input, but you can also add other devices here and basically work almost like this. As you can see, there is all the inputs. And the cool thing about this is we can basically now delete all of these inputs, all of our inputs, because now we are going to be building them through code. All right, so what is going to be our first step? So let's add some functions here that are going to be private for this input manager code. And you can also basically make this a autoload global, so it's initialized whenever we start our project. So autoloads are basically global nodes that are going to be added whenever you start your game. So we want to, when we start the game, to also run this script here as a node, I believe. So you can see this is going to be starting as a node. So if I run the project, I'm going to have some issues with the input, I think. It's going to be trying to detect inputs that we don't have. Yeah, the debugger is crazy. But the thing that I want to show you is that it is not going to show up because I did not have initialized it yet. So let's do that. So let's add our input manager here as the outer load we want, and we want to call this input manager. So this is going to be working for us. And as you can see, it's a global variable, which is available for us to run it. So whenever we run the project, and let me just select that, and you're going to see on remote, here we have our scene, and we have another node here initialized, which is our input manager, which is allows you to see here the constants and stuff. So that is why we are going to be adding as an autoload. So we can pass also functions here on the right that's going to work whenever we start the game. The methods we're going to be using to basically create the inputs are very simple. And that is, I think, the magic for this type of management on inputs. So let's add a new function here that is going to be our add key events. So we are going to be adding events here. And we can also do this in a shared way, but I think that splitting it up is going to be better. So we're going to need a string name. So we define a new action, or if we don't have the action, so let's do that. And also we need an integer for our key code. So this is going to basically define the inputs we want from the global constant here from our project. So let's do that. And this function is not going to return anything, so void. So the first thing we're going to do is to generate the new input. So, and actually, I think I'm going to need to explain this. So how in Godot does that work? So let me just explain to you. We are going to have actions in our projects that are going to define going to basically store the events we want. So we want the player device to press some actions that we're going to be using as the inputs. We also have input events, which we have two subtypes. The first one is the device we are using. In this case, we have keyboard events and we have mouse events. So the way that we want this to work is that we want the player device to basically do some stuff. So we're going to be basically pressing our keyboard or the mouse. And these are input events. So they are types of input events as well. And we also have actions. So these input events are going to trigger some actions. So in our case, we want the input events to be calling some actions, and the actions itself is going to allow us to basically move in the game. So action in game. So stuff like, let's do here like jump, run, walk. So stuff like that is going to be called by the actions itself. So whenever we have player devices that are going to be storing the mouse and keyboard events, you're going to be calling some input events, which in turn is going to trigger some actions that in turn is going to be detected by the game and allow us to move inside our game. So we are going to still use this connection between input and actions. That is why we need the two different inputs. So in Godot, if we run back here, we are going to basically need the two functions. So that is why we're going to be using that. So we're going to be creating a new var here that's going to basically store our new inputs event that we're going to save under our inputs of the actions itself. So this is going to be a key event. So you have an input event, and here is going to have the subtypes. And you can see here we have joypad, we have keyboard, we have MIDI, we have mouse, mouse button, pen gesture. So these are a lot of predefined devices that you can use from Godot. In this case, it's an input for our keyboard. That's why it's input event key. And we are going to be generate a new one from a empty one. So let's do new. So now that we have added our new key event, we're going to be basically set up its value. So this is going to allow us through set key code. And this is going to allow us to set this input event key to a key code. So this is the function we're going to be using to generate key events. And after we have done that, we're going to be basically accessing our input map to basically add this back to a action. So this is going to ask us which action you want to give this input and which input it is. So in this case, the action is going to be passed along inside of this function through the first argument. And the second one is going to be which event is going to be stored under that action. So which is the one we want to add. In this case is our key events. So this is basically all you need to add key events to our action. And we're going to basically copy this to add now mouse events. And you can also duplicate this for other types of devices you have. But basically it's almost the same thing. The only difference is some minor change here in the code to be more clear. So this is going to be the mouse button index. And let's just replace the key code. And because this is a mouse button, let's add here. This is now mouse button, not a key event. And the same thing here. This is going to be a mouse button. Let's place down there. And here, let's also change this to set, I believe it's index. It's button index. There we go. And through that, and this also should be ready to go. So we're using this code, we now allow us to add keyboard events, and with this one it allows us to add mouse events, and these are going to be stored under our action. Almost the same thing as going to project settings, adding a new action, then adding all the inputs you want. So using these two functions and this information here, let's add the new inputs whenever we start the game. So because this is a auto load we have imported inside our project through the globals here, this is going to run as a node because it's extending as a node, and node functions have a ready. So whenever we start the game, we can pass along some code to start it. So here now we are going to start the algorithm that's going to sort all of this to be basically our inputs for the project. So let's go on here and let's start it. First, we want to iterate between all the input events. So let's just maximize this. So for each one of these, so these are going to be representing an input action, and we want these to be string names. So this is going to be the first one, values here from the input actions. So these are going to be inside our input actions on the keys of that dictionary. And we want to interpret that as an array of string names. So that is going to be our first variable. So for each one of those, we want to basically add a new action. So let's now use and then I'm missing a simple function here. So let's do another function. And actually, you don't need to add a new one. I'm just going to use the define one here because it's very simple. So we're going to be accessing our input map. So the input map is basically a map of all the inputs in your project, which is the same thing you access through here. So the input map, and we want to add an action, and it's going to ask for a name. The name we already have, which is inside our dictionaries as the first one. So we are going to be adding our input action. And there we go. So for each one of those that's going to start out, we're going to be adding a new action. So here, let's see what it's going to be about. And of course, I put an S there. So input map, we are going to be adding a new action. Now let's start sorting through the algorithm itself, which is going to be parsing all the inputs. First, let's start with something called events mode, which is going to allow us to switch whenever we need to change things up. So the event mode we're going to start with is going to be basically our keyboard. And let me just do this right here. It's going to be the same thing. So for now, for the inputs itself, so we have sorted through the actions. We are adding new actions whenever we are sorting through this list here. Next thing, we are going to sort through the inputs itself on the dictionary. So let's do for input integer, because this is how we're going to define it. This variable are integers, as you can see, we stored right there. So these are inside our input actions and inside our input action string name, and they are considered as an array of integers, and these are going to be used down here. So the first thing we're going to do is check if our input int is a switch on the mode or is an input we want to store. That's why we did this negative. So if our input integer we are sorting through here is going to be detected as less than 0. If it is an event mode, so let me just put a comment there. We're going to be basically now consider that this is a change of event mode. So now let's do a simple if our input int is actually a key button. We want to switch our event mode to be the mode key event, which basically is going to switch these back to -1. And this event mode variable is going to be used next, so we know it's an input for the keyboard or the mouse. So if that is the case, if our input is equal to a key button, we are going to change the event modes to be the keyboard, or we're going to basically switch it back to being a mouse. And you can also keep adding here more events and do a match events if you want. So if that is the case, then let's do it. Now, if the input is not less than 0, that means it's a positive number. We know it's considered an input because there are no inputs in Godot with negative numbers. So we're going to apply here an else and say that this now is considered a key input event, so key integer. So now let's check if our input event is either a mouse or keyboard. So let's do a match, and we are going to say on our input integer if it is our mode key event or if it is our mode mouse event. So these are going to be the two pattern guards we're going to use here. And let's start here. It's going to be very simple. We're going to add here. So if that is the case, we're going to add our private function, which is our add key. And watch the function, it's add key events. So if that's the case, we're going to add a key event or we are going to add a mouse button event. So let's add now the input arguments. So the first one is the input action. We are basically storing that from this guy here. So this is the input action. Next, we want to pass the key code. So in this case, is our input integer. And in the case of the mouse event, it's going to be the mouse index. So now we have added all the things we need. And let's last add a print statement here so we can actually debug if this is working or not. We're going to be basically printing some stuff here. And we're going to say we want to see the input action. So let's add here our string name input action. And we also want to see the events for that. So let's do a input map action get events. So this is going to be basically return all the events from this input action. So now that you have done this, this is going to be basically take care of all your input needs. You have here a list of input action string names and a list of inputs. The first inputs here are going to define the modes. So whenever we run through this algorithm here, it's going to detect whether this is negative than 0. So if that is the case, we know that these are modes. So we can basically mix this up and it should work properly. And just make sure that your events are separated through key buttons and then you switch and just add the other devices. So now if we run our project, You can see down here, we don't have a list of inputs. And actually, let's disable always running on top, because I want to click on the main window without having to switch it off. So we can see we have no inputs. So let's see what this is all about. Oh, of course, I have done it wrong. It's the check here. So we can go back to our match statement. I found the error here. Oh yeah, I not need to match the input. So I need to match the event mode. So there we go. So now it should be able to work. And I'm going to leave this one out, and I'm going to comment this one out. Now it should work. My mistake. That was a slight overhead I have. So as you can see, the code works, and we are having some issues with inputs. Let's see. Zoom forwards and backwards doesn't exist. So it seems we are checking for inputs we don't have defined. So it's actually zoom forwards and backwards. So I'm not going to actually replace that, because I think that zoom in and out is more correct. Let me just copy these back to our code. So we want to check for zoom in and zoom out. So I'm not going to be using zoom forwards. And this is something you do not get with this code. We do not have the auto completion, but I think you can do this in other ways if you want an auto completion. So now that should work. Checking for inputs we don't have, and as you can see, it works. As you can see down here, the inputs are listed because of our code on the manager. Here we have added this debug line, and we have move forwards, action, move backwards, and it's storing an input event key, which is the W. And here we have all the properties of the input. We have pressed, echo, location. So for the mouse, we also have the information we need. If it's pressed, cancel, the position, button mask. So as you can see, we have all the interface from the input map we have. So whenever you add a new action and a new one, you're going to see that with the mouse, you have these things here. We have device, there's some additional options. We have dead zone here. All of that is accessible through this guy here. So as you can see, this pretty much works. Now you can basically add inputs to your project without using the input map. And I think that this is a little more fast than having to set it up through the input map. So as you can see, this is pretty much a little more interesting, because now you can basically simply copy this into a new empty blank project, and this is going to basically all work just like here outside of the box. Otherwise, if you are starting a new project and you want to set up inputs, you're going to have to go to the interface and manage all the inputs through here. Whereas through code, we have the input action name and the inputs itself here. So I think that through code is a little different than doing it on the other way. And I think I prefer this method here. I always like to keep things in code. As you can see, that is up for this tutorial, and hopefully you found this useful. As you can see, we have replaced the inputs from the project interface back to Godot inside using a code method. So hopefully you like this tutorial and you found it useful, and I'll see you on another one.